Dalia Barbosa here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman as we turn now to the mock trial that human rights attorney Jennifer Harbury put together this past couple weekends ago in Washington, D.C. at the time of the anti-war protest, a trial of Bush administration officials around the issue of war crimes and human rights abuses. Among the participants who testified were Nobel Peace Prize laureate Mary Maguire of Ireland and Sister Dianna Ortiz. In 1989, Dianna Ortiz was abducted by security forces while working as a missionary among the indigenous people in Guatemala. She was taken to a secret prison in the capital and brutally tortured. We're going to go now to hear some of the testimony of Sister Ortiz. She was questioned by Professor Margaret Montoya, who's an attorney and longtime civil rights activist and teaches at the University of New Mexico. Sister Dianna Ortiz talked about the day she was kidnapped when she was questioned by the attorney.
I went with one of the sisters to the convent retreat center in Antigua, and I was praying in the garden when two men approached. One of them had a gun and said that if I did not go with them, that they would hurt the other people who were participating in the retreat. There was an opening in the back wall of the garden, and I was taken through that opening. I was put into a police car, blindfolded, and put into or taken to the Polytechnica.
Sister, what is the Polytechnica?
It's a large military installation which is located near the United States Embassy.
Can you tell us what happened to you there?
I was taken to a downstairs cell. I was badly tortured and repeatedly raped.
Sister, are you able to tell us more about this?
I am. It's very difficult. Those of us who have survived torture must relive our torture every time we speak of it. And that's one of the reasons why few of us do speak publicly.
Sister, tell us what you're able to.
They began by questioning me. Every time I answered a question, no matter what answer I gave, they burned my back with a cigarette. I had over 111 cigarette burns on my back before it was over.
Sister, during this time you were answering their questions.
Yes, but they burnt me anyway. After a while, I tried to give whatever answer they wanted to hear, even if it was not true. They showed me a photo of a woman I had never seen or met, and asked me if it was me. She looked nothing like me, but no matter how I answered, I was burned.
Sister, today we've seen the photographs from Abu Ghraib. I'm wondering, when you saw those photographs, what was your reaction?
I could not even stand to look at those photographs. Neither could many of the other torture survivors, especially those of us from Latin America.
Can you tell us why it was difficult to look at those photographs?
Because so many of the things in the photographs had also been done to me.
At that point, Sister Dianna Ortiz broke down, but she continued to testify in this mock trial in Washington. Sister Dianna Ortiz, an American nun who went to Guatemala to work with women and children. The human rights attorney, Margaret Montoya, then asked Dianna Ortiz what things she saw in the photos of torture at Abu Ghraib that were done to her. Dianna Ortiz composed herself after breaking down and answered the question.
I was tortured with a frightening dog and also rats. And they were always filming parts of the torture that occurred. Parts of the torture that I was forced to participate in.
So why did they film you, sister?
They were laughing while they were filming these horrible things and threatening that later they would show them to my friends and family or even publish them.
And what were your feelings about that?
It was unbearable. No matter what you tell yourself rationally, those threats haunt you for a lifetime. It's part of the psychological torture of making you feel that it's all somehow your fault, that you are to blame for it all. Also that they can still find you and hurt you later on.
Is there more that you can tell us about?
There were other people in the clandestine cell, the clandestine prison as well. And I could hear terrible screams. Many were killed. I saw some bodies. There were children as well.
Who else was in the room while you were being tortured besides the Guatemalan torturers?
After a while, there was an American walked in.
Why do you think it was an American? Can you describe him for us?
He was taller than the Guatemalans. He was light-skinned and European-looking. He wore an obvious curly brown wig and big sunglasses and had a light-colored beard. And when he walked into the room and saw what was going on, he used a common word. When he spoke in Spanish to the torturers, he had an obvious American accent.
Do you remember what was said?
Yes. It was evident that he was upset. He ordered the men to stop the torture, telling them that I was a North American nun and that my disappearance had become public, and my disappearance was beginning to cause an uproar.
And how did they respond?
They followed his orders, and they didn't rape me again, and they left the room. I asked him if he was an American, and his answer was evasive. Why do you want to know? He asked me. I told him that he had used a word that was common in the United States. He, Alejandro, tried to help me put my clothes back on and eventually led me out of the building.
And then what happened? And then what happened?
The American, Alejandro, put me into his Jeep and drove off. And during the ride, he told me to forgive my torturers, telling me that they were all just trying to fight communism. if I didn't, that there would be consequences. He reminded me that my torturers had made videotapes and had taken photographs of the part of the torture that I was most ashamed of. In perfect American English, Alejandro told me that if I didn't forgive my torturers, he would have no other choice than to release the videotapes and the photos to the press. He also told me he was going to take me to see a friend at the U.S. Embassy. And at this point, the Jeep stopped in traffic, and I jumped out and ran.
Is there anything else?
I tried speaking in English to him, and it was evident that he understood me. And after a while, he answered and spoke in English.
And then what happened?
I was certain that he was going to take me to be executed. So I jumped out of the Jeep, as I mentioned earlier, and a woman recognized me from the news broadcast and took me in until I could call the sisters for help.
And at that point, did you leave Guatemala?
First, I went to the Marino House in Guatemala City, and then I was taken to the Vatican Embassy, and there I provided the authorities with a brief statement, never mentioning in this document the American, because that was the advice an embassy official had given to one of the sisters, and the advice that the lawyers who were assisting me had given me as well. And it wasn't until I came back to the U.S. that I began to speak publicly about the American. And in response, the U.S. government intensified a smear campaign against me. The Guatemalan government cooperated in this campaign as well. I was labeled a liar, a crazy woman, even that I was a political strategist who was trying to influence Congress to cut off U.S. aid to the Guatemalan military.
Sister Dianna, can we go back to Guatemala for a moment? Are the locations of the torture cells known publicly?
No. The relatives of the disappeared, of course, search everywhere for their loved ones and have done so for many years now. We hear that certain places, like the Polytechnica, have secret cells, but these are secret. The courts, the police, the families, they are never told and have no access.
And yet this man with American accent and American features, he knew where to find you within mere hours of the news of your kidnapping. And he was able to walk in and walk around where you were being tortured.
Yes, he was.
And he and the Guatemalan torturers knew each other.
Yes. In fact, they called him Alejandro, though I do not know if this was his real name or not.
And he seemed to be giving orders.
Yes, and the torturers obeyed him.
They called him boss?
Yes.
Sister Dianna Ortiz, an American nun and Ursuline sister who worked in Guatemala and was captured there by Guatemalan military, describing her experience. She spoke in Washington, D.C., an event organized by human rights attorney Jennifer Harbury and the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee.